In the 40K universe, the Milky Way galaxy is filled with 6 major superpowers, but there are hundreds of other minor intelligent races that have established small empires of their own. These have the potential to one day pull themselves up to become major players in the never-ending war of the grimdark future. Some of these races have a playable element on the tabletop, while others are vaguely mentioned in the Black Library and Dark Heresy books. While some of these minor races are capable of defending their territory and people from the countless threats in the galaxy, many of them have found success not through head-to-head battles, but rather diplomacy with major superpowers. Let's start off with a minor race that got some attention during the Games Workshop introduction of the Warhammer Adventures books, the Jero. This alien species has been around for longer than humanity. They were actually created by the Old Ones as one of the warrior races that battled the Necrons in the War in Heaven. Although the Jero presumably fought alongside the Eldari and the Krork, and managed to survive the Enslaver Plague, the species didn't reach the same level of success as their comrades. This could be due to the Jekero's cultural mindset, which seems to be centered around engineering and not conquest. They do all they can to survive and protect themselves, but ultimately, they're not a naturally aggressive race. The Jekero's potential for greatness amongst the stars is hidden in their innate ability to create deadly and advanced weaponry. These weapons have such high renown that the Imperium refers to the Jero as weaponsmiths. Much like the Orc race, the Jero were created with a biological blueprint that allows them to build highly advanced technological systems without having to learn it first. Just like humans are born with an instinctual knowledge to breathe, the Jero know how to instinctually design a weapon. Unlike the Orcs, the Jekero's technology can be used by any and all races, which is why the Imperium, most commonly radical inquisitors, have allied with this species in order to benefit from their expert engineering skills. When given the appropriate resources, a Jero is capable of building anything from a las cannon to spacecraft. The species has even been known to construct food synthesizers for long periods of famine or even space travel. With these technologies, a future Jero empire wouldn't have to drown out planets in industrial waste, or even require hundreds of mining worlds like the Imperium of Man. The efficiency of their advanced technology could sustain the entire empire, much like the Eldar craft worlds are able to sustain their populations. However, the crown jewel of the Jekero's advanced engineering is definitely in the theater of war, specifically the creation of digital weapons. Sometimes referred to as digiweapons, these devices are as small as a ring and are either worn or implanted into the wielder. Once activated, the digital weapon can fire almost any type of projectile, from lasers to bullets. Although the device doesn't possess the same volume of fire as a regular-sized weapon, the damage it can deal is just as devastating. The size of the device also means that multiple weapons can be carried by one single warrior. A Jero army could possess a far wider range of weapons compared to a regiment of the Astra Militarum. When it comes to space travel, the Jekero's understanding of astrophysics is also unusually deep, as they seem capable of tapping into unseen power currents that run throughout the galaxy and are unknown to all other intelligent spacefaring races, except maybe the Necrons. The Jekero's unique starships take full advantage of this knowledge, as they are open-structured lattices that resemble a unique polyhedron and are unlike any other spacefaring vessel encountered by mankind. This unusual open structure is vital to the design, as it draws upon the same unknown interstellar currents of energy that the Jero are aware of. Some Imperial savants compare it to force weapons, as the psychic energy travels through the vessel's unique spiral shape. Thus, Jero vessels are able to move, maneuver, and even enter into the warp by simply making ongoing physical alterations to the starship's shape, thus drawing in on this unseen energy. This means that unlike the Imperium, that has struggled to find webway portals, the Jero have a significant advantage, making a future Jero empire much faster than most major races in the galaxy. When it comes to unity, the Jero have been spotted traveling in large family groups. These sightings are obviously most common when a colony arrives in an Imperial-held world, but the cooperation between the Jero speaks to their highly intelligent social skills. At first, the Imperium was baffled by these nomadic Jero tribes. In appearance, the race resembles the ancient Terran orange-furred orangutans. This very primitive appearance was juxtaposed with the species' highly advanced technology. Adding to the confusion, the species doesn't seem to communicate with spoken language. Very few accounts exist of Jero demonstrating the ability to speak, and yet there are numerous accounts of multiple traveling clans banding together to attack specific targets in order to acquire the object they desire. Related families often travel and work together, and these groups are led by either a matriarch or a patriarch. Their natural and extraordinary technical talents demonstrate how capable they are at outwitting any starfaring race. Jero are quite capable of using complex and well-coordinated attacks against their targets. These targets have been lone power stations, farmsteads, or distant mining vessels. They seem to raid these places for a particular type of technological loot. The Jero will always seek to escape with their loot before their action attracts the response from their foes. If the Jero ever evolved a desire for conquest, the species could easily develop an empire capable of waging war against the major powers of the Milky Way galaxy. They would use their digital weapons and other advanced technologies to compete for dominance over resource-rich worlds, and their highly mobile space fleets would easily outmaneuver the more archaic designs of the Imperium of Man, while their tactics would resemble those of the Eldar craft world or the Drukhari, meaning that they would favor lightning-fast assaults followed by quick withdrawals to safety. The Jero Empire would easily outsmart and outmaneuver the slower and more attrition-based armies of the Milky Way galaxy.
Let's move on to another minor Xeno race that used to be a huge problem during the Great Crusade era, the Lacrimol.
Some lucky aliens managed to escape the xenocide enacted by the vengeful wrath of the Imperium. They now lurk in the shadows in the deepest corners of the galaxy. Bitter and broken, these Xenos want revenge against humanity, but can never truly accomplish it. Although there are a few Imperial savants that are still aware of their existence, the alien survivors are so insignificant that humanity refuses to acknowledge their threat. They suppress any reported sightings or redact any ancient records of these Xeno. But what this does is it creates an opportunity for these forgotten Xenos to thrive. They bite off chunks off the fat from the bureaucratic and slow-moving Imperium. Few Xeno epitomize this parasitic and vengeful notion more than the Lacrimol. Their greatest achievement wasn't the terror that they caused humans during the Age of Strife, but rather convincing man that they no longer exist. Very few records exist of the Xeno species known as the Lacrimol. Much of the data on these creatures has been lost since the Great Crusade. It wasn't until recently that Inquisitor Grandoval discovered their existence on the world of Beta Cairn. When he discovered this horrific alien species, Grandoval called an assembly of the Inquisition's Ordo Xenos, and had the Lacrimol declared a Xenos Horrificus, an imperial designation requiring that every member of this alien species be exterminated upon discovery. The descriptions that do exist of this Xenos paint a horrific picture of a large mass of flesh and limbs that are in constant motion, with only 2 black eyes remaining unchanged. This is the creature's true form, but the form that it actually usually takes is that of an average human. That is because the Lacrimol is a shapeshifter. They are capable of changing their appearance at will and use this to infiltrate their enemy's lair. But because they have ever only gotten caught aboard Imperial vessels, it is unknown how wide their shapeshifting abilities truly are. The humanoid form they take is usually that of their former victims. On top of being a shapeshifter, the Lacrimol is vampiric. It is the blood they drink that allows them the ability to shapeshift into that individual. The true danger is how quickly they can take on the shape of their victims. As soon as the blood is ingested, the Lacrimol begins deconstructing the DNA sequence and uses it as a blueprint for its new form. There are rumors that this process is not always perfect, and so the Lacrimol will not be 100% accurate to the original victim. If the difference can be identified in time, the Lacrimol's impersonation can be questioned, but once the Xeno feels like it has been detected, it will fight like a cornered wild animal. Records aren't clear if the Lacrimol can mimic voices either. The covert nature of the Xenos has made it incredibly difficult to track down. All of these biological adaptations that naturally interact with DNA could have been used in the gene labs on Luna. Check out our 40 facts on the gene labs of Luna or the Moon. I'll put a link up above. The most notable encounter with the Lacrimol has been recorded as the Cardinal Spectre Incident, or the Lacrimol Incident. This occurred during the early days of the Aculus Crusade, before the death of the War Master Aculus, and before the true extent of the Imperium's foes had been uncovered. As the Crusade fortified the region around the Well of Night, countless scouts ranged out in all directions, assessing new worlds for conquest and spying on heretical populations and blasphemous alien empires. They sent information streaming back to the War Master. Among these reports was the appearance of an ancient space hawk, the Cardinal Spectre. The Cardinal Spectre was an item of interest to the Inquisition, as it had been sighted centuries before, and records spoke of it containing the remnants of a relic ship of the Great Crusade, a ship which might have once belonged to the Young Inquisition. A mission was organized and led by Inquisitor Malus Dice of the Ordo Xenos and supported by a Death Watch kill team. It set off to find the Space Hawk's location. After months of false leads, Dice and his team finally tracked the Cardinal Spectre, following its erratic wake in the warp, to the edge of the cursed Crescent system, just beyond the boundaries of the Iron Collar. There they boarded the vessel and began to search for the relic ship. What they encountered instead was a nest of Xenos, which had apparently been living in the Space Hulk and using it as a base for centuries. At first, the kill team thought they might be facing a gene stealer infestation, as clawed shapes moved in the shadows and hissing sounds were heard echoing down the corridors. It was not until almost too late that they realized that the aliens were shapeshifters. Laying deadly traps for the kill team, the aliens had some of their numbers appear as vile alien beasts or clawed horrors like gene stealers, and they drew the Battle Brothers, the Inquisitor, and his acolytes into a hunt. Only then would they pick off the lone members of the group from behind and assume their forms, then get close enough to strike with surprise. After only a few hours of entering the Space Hulk, only Dice and a few Battle Brothers remained, and the Battle Brothers were deeply suspicious that Dice was an alien imposter. To save himself and return his report, the Inquisitor slipped away from the kill team during the firefight and made good his escape on the Cardinal Spectre, leaving all of his companions behind. Upon his return, Dice was convinced that the aliens encountered on the Spectre were the fabled Lacrimol, claiming that they were one and the same with those creatures slain by Inquisitor Grondoval and put to rest long ago. With no proof, however, and the loss of a kill team, he was shunned by his peers and it ended his career. He was a broken and babbling old man, whispering of aliens in the dark. There is another less-known encounter with the Xeno species that occurred during the Horus Heresy. A Lacrimol was used at least once as an assassin by the forces of the War Master Horus. This particular Lacrimol was able to assume the form of a warrior of the Lego Custodes and infiltrated the planet Bastion, where it was to assassinate the senators and nobles of that world's ruling class, an act that would have led the planet to revolt against the Imperium and side with Horus. The fact that this creature was able to drink the blood of an Adeptus Custodes makes it a heavily guarded secret. Few within the Imperium, other than the Custodes themselves, know of this encounter. Another race the Imperium is incredibly ignorant about, but has the potential to grow in strength, is the mysterious Fra. Very little is known about the species, including a solid description of what they actually look like, but they have plagued the Imperium and other Xeno superpowers in the Segmentum Obscurus since before the days of the Great Crusade. Aside from their high-tech weaponry, which we'll talk about in a few minutes, the race can manipulate its psychic potential at a much higher level than humanity. The species can create psychic tools called night shards that allow them to use divinatory warp powers. The full extent of this power of foresight is unknown, but it could be the reason why the armies of the Frau have managed to defeat the Imperium with so many perfectly timed strikes. The Frau have sent back many Imperial forces from their territory, and have been the cause of dozens of great Space Marine heroes being interned into dreadnoughts. The race has shown an unapologetic thirst for savagery in combat. Their primary melee weapon is a dagger they call a glass knife. The weapon is sharp enough to split ceramite, but has microscopic fractures that cause small chunks of the blade to splinter into a wound, causing incredibly agonizing pain. If the enemy doesn't die in the course of the battle, the glass knife shards dug into the wound will cause life-threatening infections. When it comes to space travel, their technology is advanced enough to create incredibly powerful battlecruisers. Although these spaceships aren't as numerous as the fleets of the Imperium, the Frau battlecruisers are incredibly dangerous due to the species' signature weapon technology known as ether. A pulse of superpower energy beams out at a target and splashes on impact. The ether field corrodes away whatever it comes into contact with, causing tremendous damage. Void shields have been reduced to nothing by the firepower of the race's ether cannons. Although these deadly ships have been encountered as part of raiding parties, the Frau battlecruisers have been sighted standing vigil over planets that are presumably part of the Fra Empire. The Imperium doesn't truly know how unified the species is. Obvious examples in the past have led many Imperial Navy captains to believe that the Frau are actually protecting the borders of some undiscovered empire in the Gothic sector, but other accounts have pointed to the species being nomadic. The Imperium's lack of knowledge showcases how little attention they have given to this threat, and also it's an insult that they haven't destroyed it yet. Rogue traders that are familiar with the Xenos have verified the existence of the Frau conclaves, which are ruled over by the leaders called satraps. Although it is unknown how coordinated these conclaves are, they all have similar criticisms of the Imperium. They scoff at the way they treat their own species, specifically when traders sell human slaves, whereas the Frau would never betray their own blood, preferring to trade in technology. The Inquisition fears that the Frau could easily be masterminding an agenda for control of the Gothic sector, somewhere deep in their hidden empire. The Frau are most likely combining their superior psychic powers with their highly advanced technology and building an arsenal that can conquer the sector. The species might even already have the Gothic sector surrounded, and every satrap in the region is simply waiting for the tides of the Immaterium to reveal the perfect moment to strike. Armies of Psi constructs that can rival the Psi Titans of the Imperium, and even the Eldar Titans, coupled with an army of millions of monstrous Psyker savages, could be lurking in the unexplored regions of space.
Now let's move on to another minor Xeno race that sporadically pops up during the history of the Imperium, the Megarachnids.
Early in the 31st millennium, the Imperium of Man encountered the death world of Urasarak. It was the 20th world encountered by the 140th Expeditionary Fleet, a contingent of the Blood Angels Legion. It was commanded by Captain Kittis Frome. Unable to translate the warnings from the orbiting satellite beacons placed in orbit of the world by the advanced human civilization known as the Interrex, that warned approaching starships to stay away from the planet as a dangerous Xeno species had been quarantined there, Captain Frome ordered his fleet's entire contingent of 3 companies of Space Marines to begin landing operations to investigate and bring the planet into Imperial compliance. Due to the extreme atmospheric turbulence present on the world, all of the Blood Angels assault craft attempting to land on the planet became scattered and were thrown off course, leaving the Imperial landing parties isolated from one another. The turbulent atmosphere also affected Vox communications and made it difficult for Imperial forces to coordinate their movements. Ground teams soon started sending garbled transmissions to the fleet's vessel in orbit, reporting that the planet was inhabited by an extremely hostile intelligent arachnoid species, later dubbed Megarachnids. The Megarachnids were an old enemy of the Interrex civilization. The Interrex was an ancient human civilization that merged with robots. To learn more about the Interrex, click on the link up at the top of this video. They had exiled the surviving members of the Megarachnids to the world they called Urasarak as an act of mercy rather than committing xenocide, as was standard policy for the Imperium. The Interrex stripped the Megarachnids of their interstellar travel capabilities, and to keep the aliens isolated on their new homeworld, the Interrex constructed weather control devices that created powerful atmospheric disturbances and interfered with radio communications in the shape of large trees across the planet in order to deter vessels from landing on the Death World. As reports of horrific combat from the surface continued, the Xenos were described as too numerous and formidable to defeat without reinforcements. These creatures had 8 legs, with 4 legs used for locomotion and the other 4 ending in sword-like claws. Their entire bodies were covered in an organically produced metallic substance that made their claws so hard that they were able to easily cut through ceramite of a Space Marine's armor. Their hides proved so resistant even to bolter rounds. When this metal exoskeleton was breached, the Megarachnids bled gray blood and had pink flesh contained within their armored hides. The creatures had no visible eyes, but were somehow able to find prey and organisms they attacked. All communication was done through clicks made from their mouths, which was described as razor-sharp metallic pincers able to tear through ceramite just as easily as their blade-tipped claws. Despite these commonalities, the Megarachnids came in a variety of sizes and shapes. The Blood Angels encountered some that had wings, the ability to spin silk and spit cement, and enormous Megarachnids, also the size of Titans, who likely played the same role in their forces. It also appeared that the race followed those Megarachnids that were larger in size. The larger the Megarachnid, the more control he had. Not long afterwards, the Blood Angels made urgent distress calls requesting immediate reinforcement and extraction. The last transmissions received by the fleet of the 140th Expedition came from Captain Kittis Frome himself. He noted through clenched teeth, "This world is murder." This name stuck, becoming the Imperium's informal appellation for Urasarak. A company of Astartes from the 3rd Legion, the Emperor's Children, arrived in response to the Blood Angels' distress call. They made the same mistake during the initial assault as the Blood Angels, as their landing parties were scattered by the planet's powerful atmospheric disturbances. The company took heavy casualties, but just as the Emperor's Children were about to be overwhelmed, a relief force of newly arrived Lunawolf Astartes from War Master Horus's own 63rd Expeditionary Fleet began to land through the breach in the atmosphere. The Megarachnids assaulting the Emperor's Children were scattered, and a full-scale Space Marine assault on the hostile Xenos of murder began quickly. 10 companies of Lunawolves, the remnants of the Emperor's Children's company, tens of thousands of Imperial soldiers drawn from the Imperial armies, Byzantine Janissaries, and several Legal Mortis Titans proceeded to level entire swaths of the grass-stalked forest and destroy every one of the atmospheric-altering trees they encountered, which steadily eroded Murder's atmospheric barrier. The War Master Horus, who commanded the Imperial assault from his flagship, Vengeful Spirit, was very pleased with the progress that was being made. Some consideration had been paid to initiating a withdrawal from Murder, now that the proper landing zone was available to allow an easy extraction of the troops, when an unexpected visitor suddenly arrived. The Primarch Sanguinius had come to Murder to inspect the dead of his original Blood Angels landing forces that had been wiped out early in the campaign. With tears in his eyes, Sanguinius asked his brother Horus if he would join him in a campaign of vengeance against his foul Xenos. The War Master replied, "Yes, let us murder. Adding 5 companies of Blood Angels to the Imperial invasion force, Sanguinius fought alongside Horus against these aliens. Thousands of Megarachnids poured out of the forest and canyons of Murder in an endless wave. Despite never retreating from Imperial assault, the Megarachnids only continued to lose ground. By the 6th month of the campaign, it seemed that the Megarachnids would soon face extinction, when a fleet deployed by the Interrex arrived in system to determine who had assaulted the Megarachnids' reservation world. Finding contact with the highly advanced humans of the Interrex to be a more pressing issue that needed to be dealt with, Horus ended the campaign against the Xenos of Murder, and thus the Megarachnids had been saved from extinction for a second time by their old enemy. Imperial records don't indicate the final fate of the savage species, as the Horus heresy quickly began.
Now, not all minor Xeno species have a huge history that predates humanity. Others are kind of recent and appeared during the 41st millennium, such as the Smeth Rats.
Mutation has plagued humanity even before the creation of the Imperium itself, and while man does everything in its power to eradicate the malevolent mutants that rise up amongst every planetary population, very little attention is placed on the non-human organisms that live alongside them. This lack of concern towards animal mutations has given a rodent species native to the hive world of Desolum in the Ascalon sector the opportunity to grow and prosper from its mutations. Known by the few locals that have encountered the semi-intelligent rodents, the Smeth Rats are a strange and mysterious species. Sometimes referred to as smelters or scav rats, these abominations were thought to have been created by an individual or organization for some malevolent purpose. But seeing as these rats flourish on their own, it is difficult to assume that a force other than mutation has created these creatures. Most likely, this species was once a typical hive rat that slowly mutated and evolved into a much larger and dangerous menace. Smelt rats can be as large as an ancient Terran dog, with razor-sharp teeth, long tails, and sharp claws. But what sets these creatures apart from the more dangerous underhive beasts is their cybernetic components. Smelt rats are intelligent and able to augment themselves to become deadlier in combat. Bionic eyes, reinforced tails, and metallic claws are some of the few common augmentations worn by these robotic rodents. While the augmentations are poorly designed, there are some smelters that are completely covered in steel. What's very peculiar about the smelt rats is that they actively avoid humans and inhabit the deep abandoned parts of the underhive, only coming out of their lairs when in need of bionic parts. These stolen cybernetics are then used to augment more of their population. When scav rats hunt, they target individuals that possess the most cybernetics, like members of the Adeptus Mechanicus. Never attacking alone, these rats form swarms that erupt into a frenzy, attacking in overwhelming waves of gnawing teeth, wiring servos, and chain-bladed claws. Once the smelt rat has brought down an individual, they rip every machine part from its body and leave the fleshy bits behind. Mangled carcasses of servitors have been found on numerous occasions, with signs that even the wires have been gnawed off to the bone. There is no signs of chaotic taint connected to smelt rats, placing some individuals at ease over their existence, believing that they are simply a nuisance that should be exterminated, but not a great risk to the Imperium. Exterminating these creatures has proved difficult, as they are extremely resilient to poisons. Unfortunately, some reports of these creatures have been rumored on other planets in the Ascalon sector, quite possibly stowing away on ships and spreading through the sector. No motive other than looting of cybernetics has been detected as of yet, but they might just be building up their forces and waiting for the right opportunity to make their presence known. Encounters have been reported where the smelt rats are led by a leader of sorts. So-called smelt rat kings, these are made up of numerous rats fused together in hideous and unnatural ways. Such tales speak of dozens or even hundreds of individual creatures conjoined by artificial components, with tails, wires, and cables tangled together and cemented with rust and filth. Each rat in this conglomeration gives up a part of their individual free will and creates some kind of justal intelligence capable of moving with a single-minded purpose.
The next minor Xeno faction I want to talk about is actually kind of creepy, the Bone Drinkers.
These fungoid, predatory, and parasitic life forms acquired their sentience from operating as physically interwoven gestal blooms. Their existence was fueled by the slow and agonizingly painful siphoning of nutrition from living animals, primarily human bone marrow. Given no technological creativity of their own, the Bone Drinkers operated at the edge of the western segmentum solar. They inhabited the scavenged void ships of other starfaring species, and raided isolated colonies and feral worlds unable to resist their plague. Initially encountered in the early years of the Great Crusade, the Bone Drinkers had been subjected to extermination protocols carried out by both the Luna Wolves and the Night Lords, which had been thought to have been successful. However, this cowardly species had been forced to flee, if not cornered in battle, and over time it became apparent that some marrow blooms of the foul Xenos had hidden themselves and survived. By the late 30th millennium, reports of attacks against isolated outposts and shippings in the regions of the stellar wastes near Olmec indicated that the Bone Drinkers were again dangerously growing in strength and number. The Alpha Legion, only a handful of years previously united with their Primarch, were assigned the order of the xenocide of the species before it could spread any further. Alpharius and his Legion's solution to the problem was both calculated in its planning and ruthless in its execution. Firstly, they divided much of their fleet into hunter-killer squadrons to hunt down the Bone Drinkers' infested void ships across the wastes, using their predatory instincts for ambush and evasion to identify places that the Xenos would be hiding in wait or fleeing to escape pursuit. Secondly, they analyzed previous patterns of infestation and attack, and quickly reasoned that in their terror, some had given themselves over to the alien species' dominion, providing them with the tribute of living sacrifices, while in others, in return for being spared or perhaps for gain, the Xenos had human aids in plotting their attack, such covert corruption having protected them from the Imperium's eye for several decades. This large communion the Alpha Legion used to their own advantage, infiltrating the conspiracy with their own agents, gathering intelligence, and luring the largest concentration of this parasitic marrow bloom to their death in prearranged traps, slaying the rest in close border action of their infested ships, or by the mass cyclonic bombardment of their concentrated breeding nests. The punishment for those worlds that had aided the alien were similarly brutal, as their rulers were put to the sword for their crimes, the colonies themselves punished by the poisoning of their water supplies, or the destabilization of their climate or seismic patterns. Inside of 3 solar years, the Bone Drinkers had been once again hunted down to the brink of extinction, but analysis indicated that some would have fled into hiding, and inevitably the threat had to be ended. In order to fully eradicate the Bone Drinkers, the Alpha Legion worked with cooperation with the Vespid Biologists of the Mechanicum to create a deadly phage to help annihilate this alien menace once and for all. The Alpha Legion insidiously deployed their virus upon the worlds of which the Bone Drinkers had preyed, the humans that populated these worlds, and the Voidborn who plied the stars between those planets were infected with the virus. In the human population, the malignancy rate of this virus was as little as 7%, but to the Bone Drinkers that might feed on them, or the generations born of them in the centuries to come, it was outright lethal. Alpharius had won the ultimate victory against the Xenos by poisoning their food supply, mankind.
And lastly, I want to talk about a Xeno species that has been connected to the Tau Empire, but I just love the aesthetic of it, the Vespids.
The Vespids are a sentient, insect-like Xeno species who developed a powerful and efficient crystal-based technology not seen anywhere else in the galaxy, as well as training a highly mobile and dangerous military force. These 2 unique attributes drew the attention of the Tau, and after some mysterious negotiations, all Vespids became members of the Tau Empire. The Vespid Biology is extremely unique, and while insect in appearance, it is by no means primitive. Unlike insects, the Vespids walk in a bipedal manner when not utilizing their membrane-covered wings, which, like the rest of their bodies, is protected by a tough exoskeleton. When next to an average Imperial Guardsman, the male Vespid is much taller, but even larger and more frightening are the females of their species. And while the exoskeleton may vary in color, on average, the Vespids have a greenish-blue hue. Each of their two arms end in diamond-hard claws, which evolved over ancient times when they were used to excavate tunnels in the rocks of their drifting islands on their homeworld. These claws are so powerful they can easily tear through most infantry armor. The Vespids' frightening appearance is also attributed to their 3 pairs of beady little eyes, known as ocelli. The uppermost pair is believed to see in the ultraviolet spectrum, the middle in the spectrum of visible light, and the lower in the infrared. Because of this, a Vespid has a field of vision much more advanced than any Xenos species. Each adult Vespid has 2 large antennae that control minor olfactory nerves. Like a Terran insect, a Vespid smells with his antennae, but unlike an insect, these antennae are not mobile, simply shifting direction like a panel. It is also of note that Vespids have no visible auditory receptors, but their wings emit a continuous ultrasonic tone, and it is believed by Imperial xenobiologists that this tone modulates and controls the workings of their crystal-based technology. Vespids were first encountered by the Tau Empire on their homeworld of Vespid. The planet is 3 light-years to the galactic south of the Tau's Dione Sept. The Tau were extremely surprised when they found sentient life on the planet, as it was a tumultuous and deadly gas giant plagued by numerous massive storms. What allowed the planet to sustain life were the thousands of floating islands of rock that were able to levitate due to the lighter-than-air gas trapped inside. Like giant stalactites hovering in the upper atmospheres, these flat-topped boulders were so large that air pressure could vary between the different levels. Eventually, these environmental conditions allowed for 2 crucial things to happen. The first came in the lower levels, where after thousands of years, a whole host of exotic crystals were formed in the lower levels of the floating island. The second was that at some point, the top levels became a breeding ground for life, eventually giving birth to the ancient Vespids, who made their home by excavating their giant structures. Remarkably, the natural design of the island worked perfectly for the Vespids' digging nature. The floating landmasses were covered in trillions of gas-filled pockets, much like a loaf of bread, which meant that if a Vespid cracked open one of these gas-filled chambers, the island didn't run the risk of losing buoyancy and come crashing down. Once the species dug deep enough, they discovered the unique crystals that grew in many of these distinctive gas chambers, which only the large female Vespids had the constitution to reach and harvest. These crystals became the basis of the species' technology. As the species grew, they spread throughout the entire planet, thanks in part to their one-of-a-kind flying abilities. Like their floating homes, the Vespids have thousands of small pockets of gas that fill their bodies and grant them flight, or more accurately, give them the ability to hover through the air like the ancient Terran bees. This biology is designed in a way that allows them to fly in almost any environment. In the end, every floating island on Vespid was colonized, and each island became an independent nation with its own leadership and traits.
And that's just a few minor Xeno species. More videos like this to come. I'll probably do another deep dive and talk about the Hrud and all these other ones. If you have any suggestions, comment down below. If you guys enjoyed this video, hit the thumbs up button and actually comment whatever you want to comment. It really helps out the channel and it tells YouTube you want to see more Warhammer 40K content, especially these deep dives. I'll talk to you guys tomorrow. This is Gersh1 with One Mind Syndicate signing out.
Always used to put my freedom first in any situation.